kunja bihari. Gopi jana vallabha girivaradhari. Gopi jana vallabha girivaradhari. Yashoda nandana braja jana ranjana. Yashoda nandana braja jana ranjana. Yamuna tira vanachari. Yamuna tira vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari. Shri Radha Madhava ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam namaskritya Naram chaiva narottamam Devim saraswatim vyasam Tato jayamudiraye Nashta prasha bhadreshu Nityam bhagavata sevaya Bhagavatyuttama shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki. So we're reading from the Bhagavatam, the instructions of Śukadeva Gosvāmī to Maharaj Parikshit, dying Parikshit Maharaj. And we're in verse number 18 today. Niyacched viṣayebhyo kṣān. I'll sing a little bit higher. Niyacched viṣayebhyo kṣān. Manasā buddhi-sārathiḥ. Manaḥ karmabhir ākṣiptaṁ. śubhārthe dhārayed dhiyā. Niyacched viṣayebhyo kṣān. manasā buddhi-sārathiḥ. manaḥ karmabhir ākṣiptaṁ. śubhārthe dhārayed dhiyā. niyacched viṣayebhyo kṣān. manasā buddhi-sārathiḥ. manaḥ karmabhir ākṣiptaṁ. śubhārthe dhārayed dhiyā. śubha-arthe dhārayed dhiyā niyacched viṣayebhyo kṣān śubha-arthe dhārayed dhiyā niyacched, withdraw, viṣayebhyaḥ, from sense engagements, akṣān, the senses, manasā, by dint of the mind, buddhi, intelligence, sārathiḥ, driver, manaḥ, the mind, karmabhir, by the fruitive work, ākṣiptaṁ, being absorbed in, śubha-arthe, for the sake of the Lord, dhārayet, hold up, dhiyā, in full consciousness. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. Translation. Gradually, as the mind becomes progressively spiritualized, withdraw it from sense activities, and by intelligence, the senses will be controlled. The mind, too absorbed in material activities, can be engaged in the service of the Personality of Godhead and become fixed in full transcendental consciousness. Oh, please repeat. Gradually, as the mind becomes progressively spiritualized, withdraw it from sense activities, and by intelligence, the senses will be controlled. The mind, too absorbed in material activities, can be engaged in the service of the Personality of Godhead and become fixed in full transcendental consciousness. So Srila Prabhupada's purport for this verse. The first process of spiritualizing the mind by mechanical chanting of the pranava or omkara and by control of the breathing system is technically called the mystic or yogic process of pranayama, or fully controlling the breathing air. The ultimate state of this pranayama system is to be fixed in trance, technically called samadhi. But experience has proven that even the samadhi stage also fails to control the materially absorbed mind. For example, the great mystic Viśvāmitra Muni, even in the stage of samadhi, became a victim of the senses and cohabitated with Menaka. History has already recorded this. The mind, although ceasing to think of sensual activities at present, remembers past sensual activities from the subconscious status and thus disturbs one from 100% engagement in self-realization. Therefore, Śukadeva Gosvāmī recommends the next step of assured policy. I like that term, assured policy. Śukadeva Gosvāmī recommends the next step of assured policy, namely, to fix one's mind in the service of the Personality of Godhead. Lord Śrī Kṛṣṇa, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, also recommends this direct process in the Bhagavad-gītā 6:47. Thus, the mind being spiritually cleansed, one should at once engage himself in the transcendental loving service of the Lord by the different devotional activities of hearing, chanting, etc. If performed under proper guidance, that is the surest path of progress, even for the disturbed mind. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Agyanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapatantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutapala Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragunatam Pitam Tvam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namustute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhyayevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shrivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Engagement in Mahaprabhu's service is really our assured policy. The word samadhi that Prabhupada mentions in the purport a couple times made me think of actually the years when I was living in the Brahmachari ashram in the ISKCON Los Angeles temple, and my service was to go to the Los Angeles airport before it closed to the public. Like in those days, you could actually go past security and bring hundreds of Prabhupada's books on the other side of security, literally where people are taking their flights or coming in. And we used, the brahmacharis used to read this one few sentences from the purport to 10.237 and the prayers by the demigods, where Prabhupada gives the definition of samadhi. And at the time we were book distributors, so that service was especially dear to us. A cook will be very happy to hear statements glorifying cooking for Krishna, and so on. So many of you probably know this. Prabhupada says, the word kriyasu, by manual labor or by work, is important in this verse. One should engage in practical service to the Lord. And so this theme of engaging in practical service to the Lord, engaging our senses, is the main theme of this verse. In our Krishna consciousness movement, all our activities are concentrated upon distributing Krishna literature. This is very important. One may approach any person and induce him to read Krishna literature so that in the future he also may become a devotee. Such activities are recommended in this verse. Such activities will always remind the devotee of the Lord's lotus feet. And this is the killer sentence, if I may. By fully concentrating on distributing books for Krishna, one is fully absorbed in Krishna. This is samadhi. So I remember, we can all testify. We're here because we've experienced some sort of param drishva, some sort of higher taste, as a result of engaging our senses in Krishna service. Sometimes less absorbed, sometimes more absorbed. In those moments, by Krishna's mercy, when we were really absorbed, whether it's in a kirtan and it was some whatever our practical service we were doing, we've all experienced some minute or greater form of samadhi, literally, right? And I'm happy that I was able to revisit this sentence. This is samadhi, and like I said, we've all had experiences of samadhi. So here, this distinction between indirect realization, or almost also we could say by correlation, artificial or way of attaining progress or attaining spiritual realization is explained here. And not only does the verse itself, not only does Śukadeva Gosvāmī make the point, but Prabhupada expands on it in the purport. And the theme again is this point that the direct process of self-realization is engaging of one's senses in the service of Krishna, right? Sarvopadi vinirmuktan sarvopadi vinirmuktan tatparatena nirmalam rishikena rishikesha sevanam bhaktiruchyate. Now we engage our senses in the service of the Lord of the senses, Rishikesh. And by doing this, one gets free of upadhis and one progresses towards the goal. And I think it's relevant here to bring in this super, super, super important notion of yukta vairagya as opposed to falgu vairagya that Rupa Goswami enunciates. It's so important that in those Prabhupada memories, I don't know which episode, or maybe it's in those following Prabhupada series, some devotee mentions that Srila Prabhupada wanted a poster printed of the anasyaktasya visayan yatarham upayunjata nirbandho Krishna sambandhe yuktam vairagyam uchate verse. The yukta vairagya verse par excellence. He wanted it posted on the entrance of the BBT warehouse, which I think in those days was in Los Angeles, right at the entrance, so that devotees could remember the distinction that we as Gaudiya Vaishnavas make between, Falgu Vairagya and Yukta Vairagya. The Falgu Vairagya, or false renunciation, or imperfect renunciation, being that renunciation wherein one artificially rejects or renounces things which could actually be engaged in Krishna's service. Not seeing the Krishna sambandha, not seeing the relationship of that thing or that activity with Krishna. And in a similar way, or in an opposite way rather, anasaktasya vishayan yatarham upayunjata, etc. That verse Rupa Goswami mentions, but being unattached to the objective self, one actually engages it in Krishna's service. And that itself is the proper renunciation. And that obviously entails senses. Like you can't engage things in Krishna's service without senses. And hence, as an example, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur engaged one of the first cars ever produced in India as a sannyasi too. Such revolutionary vision. And does anyone know where he drove that one of the first cars ever manufactured in India? Yeah, he drove it right to Radhakund. There's a little bit more traffic nowadays. That was a joke. Srila Prabhupada, or staying on Bhaktisiddhanta, notion of the Brihat Mridanga. And as a matter of fact, it's not just the Gaudiya Vaishnavas who have this notion of engaging senses in Krishna's service. I mean, the printing press, where millions of Bibles, Christian Bibles were printed, and that started in Europe back in the day, and they did the same idea. They most probably didn't know Rupa Goswami nor the term Yukta Vairagya, but they understood that, okay, we have to glorify God, and we're going to engage our senses in glorifying God by using this technology at our disposal to print, their equivalent of the Vaishnava Shastras. And so we see that, in Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's mood of, the Brihat Mridanga, which Srila Prabhupada, took up to heart. Engaging one's senses in Krishna's service. One time, Hridayananda Maharaj told me once that Prabhupada told him, should I be such a fool and imitate Lord Chaitanya and walk barefoot? No, because Prabhupada engaged his senses with whatever technology and objects that were available at the time where he was manifest on the planet, and used jumbo jets, as they used to be called, and for example, traveled around the world. How many times was it? 13 or 14? 14 times around the world. So in that sense, we could speak of real renunciation, of really engaging one's senses. And because, the modern day Vaishnavas, at least those in ISKCON and other lines coming from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, are precisely in the line of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, that engagement of the senses in Krishna's service translates into somehow assisting Lord Chaitanya in spreading the Sankirtan movement, and somehow or other spreading the Yuga Dharma, right, all over the world. Nakaratigram sarvatra prachar hoive moranam. But that notion of like actually, how do we actually renounce material objects, or how do we use our senses, is really unique. For example, in the Bhagavad-gītā, when you just look at Krishna's verse, where he talks about the tortoise and how the self-realized soul, right? What's the actual verse? One who is able to withdraw the senses from sense objects as the tortoise draws its limbs within the shell is to be understood as truly situated in knowledge. So you read that at face value and you would think, okay, that means, sort of a Mayavadi dealing of the senses with their objects. We literally, the analogy is clear here. We withdraw the senses from the sense objects. So we withdraw to the Himalayas, or we Mauna Vrata and so on. But in the purport to that verse and other verses in that same area of that second chapter of the Gita, Prabhupada, for example, makes reference to Maharaj Ambarish in the 9th canto. That series of verses that starts with the Savai Mana Krishna Padara Vindayor, etc., where Ambarish Maharaj, engaged his eyes to look at the deity of the Lord, engaged his words in glorifying the Lord, engaged his hands in washing the temple of the Lord, engaged his legs in walking to the temple of the Lord, and so on. So it's peculiar. It's peculiar how the Vaishnavas, and we as Vaishnavas believe that that's the Siddhanta, but from a sort of a somewhat objective point of view, or a little bit more objective point of view, it seems at least interesting that many verses speak of this type of what we would call Falgu Vairagya, and yet the Siddhanta is no, you use your senses actively, right, in Krishna's service. And there's many references to that in our Shastras, right? One of my Shiksha gurus, Brigupati Prabhu, who some of you are from California here, you know him. His wife lives here in Mayapur, and his daughter, and one of his favorite verses that I've kind of inherited from him is this famous Atakshi Krishna Namadi Na Bhavid Grayam Indriyai Sevon Mukhe Hi Jivado Swayameva Suratyada. That Krishna and everything related to Krishna, like Krishna's holy name, Krishna's abode, Krishna's leelas, etc., right? Krishna Nam Adi cannot be understood by the blunt material senses, but when you engage the senses in Krishna's service, starting with Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, and Mahaprasad Ki Jai. When we engaged our senses, starting with the tongue, in Krishna's service, then Krishna reveals himself to us, right? So the Vaishnavas save themselves, literally, unless they're pure devotees and they're always experiencing Krishna conscious bliss. And as apprentices, there's that story that Giriraj Swami tells, like how when Prabhupada was on the morning walk on Juhu Beach, and one devotee told Prabhupada, sometimes I'm in Maya, right? And what did Prabhupada say? You're always in Maya, sometimes you're in Krishna. So, the difference between, at least speaking for myself, the pure devotee and the conditioned soul, is that the pure devotee, from our understanding, from what Shastra says, is on a spontaneous level of Krishna consciousness. And it's like the analogy that I like to give is the analogy of, when you turn on your computer, you have some settings that are already there, right? You just have to turn on the computer, and this software or this application just automatically turns on, right? Default settings. So the pure devotee has this default setting of being spontaneously attracted to Krishna, like always. The extreme sublime example of the gopis of Vrindavan, and we hear from the 10th canto, right, that they curse Brahma because, for a split of a second, with their eye blinking, they can't see Shyamasundar. You foolish engineer, how did you manufacture these eyes that blink, right? Or we hear from, I'm not an expert in the intimate leelas of Vrindavan. I don't know that many. I haven't read that many, but I did hear from reliable sources that pastime where the gopis are speaking among themselves and they complain about how Krishna is, just not a bad person, and they decide, okay, you know what, we're gonna stop speaking about Krishna. Let's just forget him. Okay, well, let's and then a few moments elapse, very short moments elapse of silence. And then one gopi says, but when he plays his flute, it's so beautiful. Oh yes, and when he comes back from the forest with the cows, oh yes, and when, they just default settings. Like the opposite of, what Prabhupada described, that devotee who approached him on the beach. Like our default setting, or the default setting of a conditioned soul, is you turn on the computer and, where is, well, let's be frank, where is sex life? Where is money? Where is name and fame? Right? That's immediately our default setting as conditioned souls. We want sense gratification, right? And so we force ourselves. No. We beat ourselves with the shoe 100 times in the morning, 100 times in the evening. And so why am I saying this? Because there's a link. Yeah. So the Vaishnava is saved by engaging in the mission of Lord Chaitanya. That's the point. At least the pure devotee experiences great bliss in doing so. As a matter of fact, right? Prabhupada describes that even the Uttama Adhikari comes down to the Madhyama Adhikari because there's so much relish, there's so much pleasure to be had in sharing Krishna consciousness with others, which only Madhyama Adhikaris do, that even the Uttama Adhikari comes down to the Madhyam level. It's amazing, right? But for the sadhaka, the struggling sadhaka, I remember once on the Polish tour, I'll always remember this, me and Mathuranath, who was at the time the assistant of Indradumna Swami, we walked into his room one morning before the daily Harinam, and I don't know why or how, but he told us, he said, preaching saves us. Preaching saves us. Another time, I remember I was in Australia with him, and no, actually, it was in Poland, and we were doing this Harinam on the beach, and we would stop every 10 minutes or every few minutes because people wanted to take selfies. And at one point, I remember I was playing mridanga, and there was one young man, non-devotee, standing maybe 5 meters, 10 meters away, and he was just looking at the devotees. He was looking at the Harinam party. And I could see clearly there were like tears that started gliding down his eyes. So I was playing the drum and I was just like, wow, look at, I'm thinking in my mind, well, this is, amazing. This guy is experiencing some spiritual emotions here. And then out of the blue, I remember Indradumna Swami came right into my face, and because he noticed me looking at this guy, and then I always remember this, he said, there's no greater ecstasy, than witnessing someone, take their first or fifth or 10th step towards Krishna. And what is that ecstasy? And this is the point I wanted to get to later on, but it's Krishna's reciprocation. That's the whole point. It's Krishna's mercy. Ye yata mam prapadyante tam sataiva bhajamyaham. Right? Vishaya vinivartante niraharasya dehina raso varjam rasopyasya param drishtva nivartate. Krishna reciprocates. And this is really amazing when you think about it, how dependable Lord Chaitanya is on that front. Prabhupada calls this the assured policy. Like, you want the assured policy? Engage in Mahaprabhu's Sankirtan movement, and you will get the reciprocation from Lord Chaitanya. You'll get that samadhi in greater or lesser degrees. Most of us, it's lesser degrees. There's one devotee in New York, he printed a t-shirt that says, chant Hare Krishna and be happy. And in small print it says, or at least chant Hare Krishna. Being honest about where we are. In Krishna's pastimes in Vrindavan, in the 10th canto, remember that discussion that Krishna has with Nanda Maharaj? And if I understand correctly, Krishna is sort of critiquing or criticizing Nanda and what he at that moment is speaking about, namely this, what's the philosophy? The mimamsa, karma mimamsa, right? That, if you just do this or that, you will get the result automatically. It's like a mechanical process, right? And we hear from Shastra that bhakti is not mechanical, right? You can do all the hearing and, you could do whatever, everything right, but Krishna is the, like Bhaktisiddhanta said, right, the transcendental autocrat. He can decide. And the reason I mention this is because having said, even though our Shastra says that bhakti is not mechanical, devotees experience, especially in the realm of reaching out to people and giving people the chance to hear the holy name, to chant the holy name, to read about Krishna, that activity, it's almost like it's mechanical, like you'll always get Krishna's reciprocation. There'll always be some higher taste there, isn't it? And at least for me, I started wondering, like, how is it, like, are you sure it's not mechanical? Because every time I go on Harinam, and I'm not saying, I don't feel, anger and greed and the threefold miseries are there, but even in a contaminated consciousness, it's undeniable that experience is there. And so what is that experience that keeps us going day after day after day? And what is that experience that the acharyas and the scriptures push us to experience? Engage your senses to get that. It's Krishna's reciprocation. It's Krishna's mercy. It's Krishna's mercy. Just shows how much Krishna, loves us. How much Krishna loves the soul, and how much Krishna reciprocates even a little bit of service rendered to him. And especially when it's done in the mood of Lord Chaitanya to help alleviate the suffering of conditioned souls in this horrible material world of birth and death, right? Now, Prabhupada said we should speak from personal experience, so allow me to give another personal anecdote. Recently I was in the south of France, in a city called Nice, which is a very sort of touristy, very superficial, beautiful city near the beach. And I happened to be all alone, and I had 200 books with me, and I wanted to distribute them all, and I also had some cards, business cards with a QR code that links the QR code to two of my, I guess, best videos on my French YouTube channel, where I, try to present Krishna consciousness as my little service, engaging my senses. Oh, as a matter of fact, speaking of movie making, I as I was coming here, I was like, oh, I got to tell this anecdote, because it comes into this theme of engaging one's senses in Krishna service. When Bhakti Charu Maharaj was filming Abhay Charan, those who doesn't know what is the Abhay Charan television series? It's starting to be a while. About 20 years ago, he made this television series, right, based on the Lilamrita by Satsvarup Maharaj, on Prabhupada's life. And many of the episodes he himself directed. And I remember once we were on set somewhere, maybe in Hyderabad or something, and he said, smilingly, almost kind of like a child, he said, I'm the first sannyasi ever to be a movie director. So coming back to my lowly self-example in Nice, like I was all alone, and the modes of nature, like when you're not in Sangha, no wonder Prabhupada says in the, I think, 7th canto purport that, the one who thinks he can live, one who thinks he can be Krishna conscious outside of the association of devotees is living a hallucination, right? But what saved me was Rishikena Rishikesha. Like I would somehow get my body out that door, and I would just I would go to the college and approach students and say, here's a great book, and check out this channel. It's got videos about you believe in karma, right? And yes, well, check it out. And during that 1, 2, whatever hours, I really felt the modes of nature really go far away. and even some sort of bliss there, right? So rishikena rishikesha sevanam bhakti ruchyate, like when we engage in Krishna service, and we all, you all have to, you already are, or if you are not, you can think of it, you have to somehow, or you have to both find, like Prabhupada says in the first canto, chapter 5, purport, I forgot which verse, but he says, the expert devotees, which is you all, the expert devotees can discover novel ways and means to convert the non-devotees in terms of particular time and circumstance. That's important. Time, place, and circumstance, sometimes we don't take that seriously enough. Devotional service is dynamic activity, and the expert devotees can find out competent means to inject it into the dull brains of the materialistic population. Such transcendental activities, again, engaging one's senses, for the service of the Lord can bring a new order of life to the foolish society of materialistic men. So like I was saying, Bhaktisiddhanta, we see Narottam Das Thakur even used language in Krishna's service. Like, he used vernacular Bengali, which up to then was not used to communicate like direct translations of Sanskrit Shastras. But he made the Sanskrit literatures available in a vernacular language, which is available to, the common people who didn't know Sanskrit. And again, the example of Bhaktisiddhanta, being one of the first persons who wore a watch and who drive a car, and Prabhupada and his use of technology. And that principle of using one's senses in the mission of Lord Chaitanya, according to time, place, and circumstances, trying to discover novel ways and means, as Prabhupada says, is still going on today. You see that especially in the online world now, right? In India, for example, there's a few devotees who have these huge channels on YouTube, for example, with hundreds of thousands of followers, subscribers. For example, what is it, that rock band? The Madhavas? The Madhavas, they're huge. They were criticized at the beginning, but just see, hundreds of thousands, millions of hours of views where people are hearing the holy name, My personal favorite, my heroes, Kaustubha and Raghunath Prabhu from the Wisdom of the Sages podcast. Have you heard of that one? They were voted #1 podcast on Apple Podcasts worldwide in the category of spirituality 1 year ago. Can we say a Haribol to that? Haribol! Christians say, can I get an amen? Can I get an amen? Everyone goes, amen. So can I get a Haribol? But it's amazing. And this is, a Western audience, tough nuts to crack. The Paschatya Desh is a difficult nut to crack. Western Europe, Australia, North America. You need a lot of mercy to get that Krishna consciousness spread there. And somehow these two prabhus, these two grihastas, who are, really, in my opinion, following the principle of stanestitaha. I often, the jnane prayasam utapasya namanta eva jivanti sanmukaritam bhavadiya varta stanestitaha shutigatam tanuvam manobir. The principle of, taking into consideration local culture and hearing and chanting in that context. Look at their success. And voted #1 on Apple Podcasts worldwide. There's thousands of different podcasts. And, the number of Christians in the West far phenomenally outnumbers the number of Vaishnavas. The number of Vaishnavas in the West, you can count them on the fingers of your hand, almost, right? Compared to, for example, the number of Christians. It's like, you go to Saudi Arabia and you say, okay, how many Christians are in Saudi Arabia? And yet, you see how, they managed to do this fantastic podcast where they're also, preaching very straight. It's like, it's Shastra. There's bridge preaching also, which we should not, I don't think, criticize. There's room for everything. There's the Jay Shetties, who are, not mentioning Krishna, not mentioning Bhagavad-gītā, but, are speaking principles found in the Gita, found in the Bhagavad literatures, and that's what Krishna is inspiring them to do. As a matter of fact, I remember once I was walking in the street in Paris, and I met this girl, and she's like, and I, showing her a book, and she was like, oh, do you know Jay Shetty? And I was like, yeah, I know Jay Shetty, yeah. I was like, yeah, I listen to his stuff all the time. It's really, and she was so favorable to getting Prabhupada's book, right? So, but coming back, just one last glorification of this Wisdom of the Sages podcast. They're very modern, and yet they speak straight Bhagavatam. Like, this is what the Bhagavatam says. This is what the Bhagavad-gītā says, So this is inspiring for us. We shouldn't we shouldn't be jealous of them or criticize them. We should be so happy that Mahaprabhu is empowering, some devotees who are following strictly the four regulative principles and who are finally able to, find some cracks or some cracks in the concrete of modern Kali Yuga, So in that same way, you all have your guna and karma. You all have your Krishna-given abilities. You all have your special. It's such a corny term they use now. Superpowers. But it's true, astrologically maybe someone has, an exalted Venus, so they're, super qualified at making paintings or at singing beautifully, and someone else is, has a whatever. You get my point. You all have some fantastic abilities, and you are engaging them in Krishna service, and you should continue engaging them in Krishna service. And by that process of rishikena rishikesha, you can continue experiencing that higher taste, which saves you, literally, from falling into maya, from breaking the four regulative principles, and experiencing what it is to be in tamaguna and rajaguna. So before concluding, I'd like to open the space for some corrections, criticisms, questions, Prabhus. Mishra Bhagavan Prabhu, thank you for being here.
You mentioned the phrase transcendental autocrat, which I think we can give that to Prabhupada as the theme of ISKCON is following his instructions. But we see that Prabhupada gives often a lot of different instructions on one subject, like chocolate, for instance. In 1972, Prabhupada told Haribol Prabhu that he ate some chocolate and said, this is nice. And then in 1976, Prabhupada was asked about chocolate, and he told Jai Prabhu that chocolate's prohibited. And we can see that Prabhupada gives sometimes so many different instructions according to time, place, and circumstance. So how do we know, what he's asking us to do? What's appropriate? What's the criterion of which instruction that applies?
Yeah, what the reference that I can think of, Prabhu, in response to your question is the book "What is the Difficulty" by Shrutakirti Prabhu, where, if I'm not mistaken, Shrutakirti Prabhu asked that precise question to Prabhupada, and in that context, Prabhupada answered a specific way. You remember? Shrutakirti Prabhu says, Prabhupada, how do we know the difference between principles and details? Right? And then in that particular context, Prabhupada gave an answer, which I find sort of like if I had been there, I would have said, but can you please say more? Because it's not satisfying. I mean, it's, not to insult Srila Prabhupada, but it's like, can you explain more, please? He said, that takes a little intelligence. Right? Kind of ambiguous. Your reaction is exactly how I felt. Like, okay, what does that mean? I think an answer that is certainly not wrong, it's a safe answer, is that, if you're Krishna conscious, Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam pritipurvakam dadami buddhi yogam tam. So hopefully, if we're Krishna conscious, then Krishna will actually do what he says in the Gita, and he will, guide us with transcendental intelligence to make the right decision. And so I think sincerity is super important. We have to be sincere. If we're not sincere, then game over, right? But it's true. I was speaking to Garuda Prabhu recently, and he told me that Mataji Urmila had mentioned to him in a conversation that, not just about chocolate, you'll find a lot of contradictory statements by Prabhupada on many topics. Fortunately, we have Shastra, which is super important. Like, you know, our trifold epistemological authority system, you know, sadhu, guru, and Shastra. So the buck ends at Shastra. And sometimes we have to find clarification in Shastra, maybe, to make light of apparent contradictions in something that Prabhupada may have said, you know. Okay, thank you. Prabhuji.
Thank you, Prabhuji, for nice class. First time I'm hearing you.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Prabhuji, in the purport, it is mentioned that the first process of spiritualizing the mind by mechanical chanting of the pranava omkara. So why it can be mechanical? It can be the true chanting also, because the yogis, for the self-realization of Paramatma, so they chant omkara. So why it is mentioned mechanical? Why Prabhupada wrote mechanical?
I guess you'll have to ask him when you see him next. I don't have the answer. You make a valid point, a valid shastric point. It's a pity, speaking of Omkara, just as a side note, not to answer your question, just as a side note, since you brought up the Omkara, it's a pity that in today's society, the Omkara has sort of been hijacked by the Mayavadi groups, you know? Because the Omkara actually has a lot of popularity, and you know, Krishna speaks of the Omkara as he himself, right? And so it would be nice that somehow, as time progresses, the Vaishnavas reappropriate you know, the Om symbol as a Vaishnava, you know, sound, as a Vaishnava symbol. Anyone else?
Thank you, Prabhu, for the class.
You're welcome.
Your point is well made that in today's world, we have to do what it takes to spread Krishna consciousness, and this is actually Srila Prabhupada's direct instruction. Now tax your brains how to spread Krishna consciousness. These are his exact words. So by any means possible, as long as it's legitimate, as long as it's authorized, spreading Krishna consciousness is actually our duty. It's our responsibility. We cannot shy away or shirk from that duty because we have been given so much good fortune, and therefore we have to help others. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
That's a great point. Prabhuji. We'll stop at 9, huh? As
Prabhuji, you mentioned about a very good point about Yukta Vairagya, but like for prasadam, yeah, we take prasad, it's the remnants of the Lord. That is Yukta Vairagya. But the thing is, this Yukta Vairagya sometimes goes towards sense gratification. So can you advise like how to limit that?
Are you criticizing the Goranga pizzas? Yeah, I think sincerity is important, and I think at the end of the day, like, are you following the 4 regulative principles? You know, the real cutting line is, you know, are you following or breaking, you know, the no illicit sex, no gambling, no intoxication, no meat eating? And are you are you introspective? Are you, like, you know, praying to Krishna, to Nishingadev, please, like, if I do want to, you know, if I am doing this for sense gratification, please purify me from within. Like, I don't want that, and maybe I'm blind to myself. Maybe I'm lying to myself. Maybe I'm self-duplicitous. So you please cut that. You cut through that, and make sure that I'm actually honest, and you please purify me of whatever is inauspicious in my motivation. And hopefully Krishna will reciprocate with that attitude, you know. Can I tell a quick leela about chocolate? You know, and this is not to just, you know, all respect to the GBC resolution, okay? Like, I don't want to be quoted here. I'm just telling a leela, okay? I don't want to, you know, Chandra Shekhar in class, you know, he told everybody they should eat chocolate. Okay, that's not the point. It's just a personal anecdote which I find charming, and which has to do with me. So, Prabhupada gave chocolate personally to Indradyumna Swami a couple of times in Switzerland. So like Indradyumna Swami received chocolate from him, from his own hand, more than once, you know. So imagine, the founder Acharya gives you chocolate, you'll have a hard time stopping, probably, even if the GBC says so. So on the Polish tour, we 1 year I would go back from the festival site in this van, this Mercedes van, maybe an 8-seater, back to our base. And that year I happened to be part of the crew that went back with Indradyumna Swami. And Bhakti-charu Swami also occasionally ate chocolate. And Indradyumna Swami knew that Bhakti-charu Swami sometimes ate chocolate, so it became a routine every night. You know, this is like guerrilla warfare in the front line in Poland, and you know, you finish the festival at 1 in the morning. So we would stop at a petrol station, and the driver, Guru Kripa Prabhu, would go into the petrol station and bring back 8 Magnum ice creams. No eggs inside, don't worry. And then, you know, he would bring him in, and then Indradyumna Swami every night, okay, Chandra, offer them to Bhakti-charu Swami. Are they offered? Yes, Gurudev. Okay. And then we all take this ice cream. And then like 6 months later, remember, I told Bhakti-charu Swami, I said, you know, I was offering chocolate to Krishna via you on the order of Indradyumna Swami. And then he laughed and he said, okay, well, you tell him next time that from now on, I will offer all my chocolate to him. Where were we? Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Thank you. A lot of nice points, especially just a quick side. The wisdom of the sage is really amazing. I've seen so many devotees come out of it. Really good devotees at that. But he mentioned a question. You know, how do we? Sometimes this yukta vairagya can be come like sense gratification, and the question comes up that. You know, we have services that we have a propensity for, we like to do, you know. Some devotees like to lead kirtan, some devotees like to give class, some devotees may not like to give class. Ultimately, we want to do what Krishna wants us to do, but, and we want to surrender to our service, you know, say, you know, a temple president gives you a service you don't really like, but you're going to do it anyways.
As a brahmachari. For
Krishna, you know, or you know, whatever it may be. So, but we still have our propensities. You know, we still have our propensities that we like to do. And is it that in doing what we like to do for Krishna, it purifies it? Or should we just...
I think that tendency is always there. Like Krishna says in the Gita, right? One acts according to one's nature. And this is not to justify sense gratification. Like, you know, like I have a tendency to, you know, take drugs. Oh, well, then, please, you know. This has to do with guna and karma. This has to do with varnashram, right? So at least there's that one verse where Krishna says everyone acts according to one's nature. So what gets purified is perhaps, you know, the lust and the greed and the anger and the anarthas, but the propensity remains the same. Then again, not then again, but in parallel, maybe, you know, when you're super advanced, super exalted, you can sort of do any service, you know, but once material guna and karma, at least according to the Supreme Personality of Godhead's own words in his main scripture, is that one's, you know, nature is there. He even says, what can repression accomplish? And so sometimes that activity can be continued to be done within the brahmachari ashram or the sannyasa ashram, and sometimes it may be necessary to do it through the grihastha ashram. I'm not implying anything, but that's just how it you know, spells out. Okay, one last question, Prabhu. Oh, sorry. Oh, okay.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. I'm just asking for someone who's watching online. I'm just going to read out for her. In purport, it may seem at face value that the engagement in service, we will be pure, but if we somehow stop, we see that we haven't changed at all.
Yeah, it's true, isn't it? it's a good point. Like, as a quick to substantiate that point, like using my example again, I remember I spent about 10 years in the Brahmacharya ashram. Then I decided to go back to university, and I found myself at the University of California in Santa Barbara, where there's no devotees. And I really thought, like, oh my God, like, I haven't made any advancement because I'm just as attracted to sense gratification as I was 10 years ago, you know. Then again, what comes to mind is Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, that it's described in Bhakti Vikas Maharaj's book, where some devotee approached him and said, you know, Guru Maharaj, I feel like I'm not making any advancement. And what did Bhaktisiddhanta say? You're making advancement, right? So that sentiment is healthy. And we have to have faith that, no, the process works. Come on, it does work. Otherwise, you know, we should ask for our refund. So to conclude, Prabhu, yeah, imagine, like, I want a refund. So yeah, we're lucky, we're fortunate to be in Mayapur, we're fortunate to be in this super sangha, we're fortunate to be in ISKCON, we're fortunate to be at Prabhupada's lotus feet, we're fortunate to have each other, we're fortunate to have a holy name, the holy name, and we should just continue with this process, continue with you know, thinking of the welfare of people who may not have yet, you know, in cosmic time, who are 1 millisecond behind us in terms of having come to Krishna consciousness. And if we just continue, you know, moving, you know, with the mood of tatenu kampam susamikshamano, which Prabhupada mentions, right, in Nectar of Devotion, that should be like the mood of all devotees, then we can feel confident that you know, we'll be as happy as we could possibly be in this world, and then we have this great hope, you know, of going back home, back to Godhead. Thank you, Prabhus. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Gaura Premanande, Hari Hari Bo.